K00 award that's provided for transition from pre-doc to postdoc and is based on the R99 R00 award that we talked about last week. So the pre-doc fellowships, the F30s and F31s, provide support for doctoral candidates. It's support for a research training, typically leading to a doctoral degree, PhD or something equivalent. The F30, as I just said, provides support for those seeking dual degrees, MD, PhDs, or equivalents. What it provides is stipend at NIH scale, which in most institutions is probably not a living wage and is usually topped up by the institution to whatever is the competitive stipend at your particular institution. It also provides tuition and fees up to $60,000, 60% cost, institutional allowance for travel, a little bit of research supplies, books, so on, and up to 5 years total support. In addition, there recently, with NIH sensitive to work-life balance issues, you can ask for childcare costs on this award up to $2,500 per year. This is a really nice addition, a nice benefit addition to this award, and recognizes that NIH realizes that people at this stage, students at this stage, are often having young families and may need some help to balance work and family life. Postdoc fellowships provide support for the next stage, those that have completed their graduate training and then want to pursue research training as a postdoc. It must enhance the applicant's understanding of health-related sciences. It can also be used to support health professionals pursuing a research degree. So if you're an MD or clinically qualified and you're in a program that leads to a PhD, a research program, then your support would come from an F32 rather than from an F31. So any MDs out there might want to consider that and understand that they can get support through this mechanism. Financial support is a stipend at NIH scale. Again, tuition and fees, institutional allowance, and up to 3 years aggregate support from either of the two mechanisms, either the institutional awards or the individual awards. So for example, if you are already on an institutional training grant, a T32, and you have your first year on the T32, and then you apply for a F32, you can only ask for another 2 years so that you get an aggregate of 3 years total from NIH, 1 year from the T32 and 2 years from the F32. Again, these will provide childcare costs up to $2,500 a year that you can request in the budget in your application. There's this new award called the F99K00, which is, as I said, based on the K99R00. And this one is to facilitate the transition from pre-doc to postdoc. So the F99 phase provides support 1 to 2 years to complete your doctoral education. So you would apply once you've determined your thesis project and you're a full-time doctoral research. And then 3 to 4 years mentored postdoc education. It's a single application for up to a total of 6 years support. And the transition between the two phases depends on, it's contingent on you completing your degree, finding a postdoc position, all of those things. It's being piloted as part of the NIH Blueprint Diversity Specialized Pre-Doc to Postdoc Advancement in Neuroscience. For those of you who are in neuroscience, particularly those of you who are minority candidates, should really consider this award because it provides, basically you are set for 6 years of research training from student to postdoc. Very attractive award. NIH has a comprehensive website for these award mechanisms. If you go to this site, and when we send out the PDFs for these sessions, any of the links in the blue boxes here will be active. So you can go from the PDF directly to the website. And if you click here, you'll go to this page, click here. This is called the Fellowship Kiosk, and give you an extensive amount of information about all of these awards. The success rate for these awards are significant. They're considerably higher than the success rate for your advisors who are submitting for a new R01. So for 2020, which is the last year that we have full data, you can see that the success rate for the F30 is in the high 30%. And success rate in any fiscal year, in any 1 year, is simply the number of awards for each mechanism that get funded divided by the number that was submitted. So it's around 38, 37% for the F30, around 28% for the F31, and 29% for the F32. So around roughly a 1 in 3, a slightly less chance of success. And over here, you can see the number of each award type that was awarded in 2020. So 882 graduate students got F31s, and over 500 got F32s last year, or 2 years ago. That's good news in comparison to the success rate if you were submitting for a new R01, which is slightly less in 2020 than 20%. Success rates also differ across NIH institutes. So whereas for the F32, the NIH average is around 27, 28%, you can see that here. Each of the different institutes at NIH that supports F32, some may be higher, some may be lower. If your research covers the scope of more than one NIH institute, you might want to look at this data and see where your chances might be higher in a particular institute. As we talked last week, each of those institutes is broken down into programs. Each of those programs covers an area of research or training, and there are program officers who administer the funded grants in those areas. And there are program officers specifically dedicated within NIH Institute for training and career development programs. And as we emphasized last week, cultivating their interest and support is really essential for your success at NIH. These are the folks who know exactly how their particular institute manages these kinds of awards, what the eligibility is, what the scope is. You're free to contact them. It's a good idea to be professional and polite. Send them an email, and I'll show you in a moment how to find that contact information. You may want to send a draft of your specific aims with your biosketch. Does this look like something that your institute would be interested in supporting? Am I eligible for this? Other kinds of questions. Go to the program offices. My stock answer when anybody asks me a question about NIH awards is, have you spoken to your program officer? Really important to make their friends, and important to make them early because you will develop lifelong relationships with these individuals. When you look at the program announcement for each of the awards and go to this link close to the top of the page, it will give you, or bring you to a page that will give you institute-specific information about this award mechanism. Will give you the contact information for the program officers and any specific details about how that particular institute manages the award. I think that's all I need to say. Let's check the chat to see if there's any questions. I don't see any. So So unless anybody has any burning questions, let's
Sound good? Okay.
let me, you
Can you see my screen?
absolutely.
Okay, and I do not know why it is not full screen, but are you seeing a full screen?
No, you need to click on the full screen button.
Yeah, I
Down the
did.
bottom,
No.
bottom right. All right. Yeah, you
Yeah.
go. No. Yep, you go. Oh, go back one.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Well, Rob, thanks for setting the background. Now, these NRSA applications are such a great way to start building your research credentials. They look great on your CV. And if you obtain an NRSA, it already is an indicator to say you're a grad student and you're looking for postdoctoral positions, that you've successfully obtained some research funding. And that really can convince someone that you're thinking of working with for your postdoctoral training that you're very serious and highly competitive and successful. Same for those of you who receive a postdoctoral F32. So I'm going to go through the materials that comprise the application. And these fellowship applications have moving parts. So I'm going to go through a lot of detail, but keep in mind you can obtain a PDF of the presentations after we present, not today, but they'll be available after you complete an evaluation form. Okay, so start out with information. And the information, the instructions for fellowships are currently version G. And again, as Dr. Milner indicated, the program announcement has all that information that includes the review criteria, as well as links to the folks that you can contact for additional information. And again, always make sure you have the most current version. Currently, the PA21s are up. And this is the parent announcement, and you'll see it's named the Ruth L. Kirstein NRSA, and that's to honor Dr. Kirstein, who served as interim deputy director of the NIH between various directors. And she's also been a huge advocate for graduate education and postdoc education. So again, this program announcement is something you need to read. It will tell you what you need to include in your application, the deadlines, and just keep in mind, things change at NIH. So for example, if you're not going to write your application until say next fall or a year from now, likely you'll have to make sure you have the most current information. And again, the fellowship awards fall into multiple numbers. The F30 is for the MD PhD type dual degree person. It could be a DDS PhD. The individual predoctoral fellowship, which I think is going to be the one many of you are interested today. There are also fellowships to promote diversity. So if you qualify or think you're eligible for a diversity award, I encourage you to speak with a program officer to confirm your eligibility. We, as your host today, can't confirm that. We can advise you, but we would actually tell you to speak with a program officer. And the F32 is excellent. And again, this new F99K00, I believe NCI now has one, and the National Institute of Environmental Health is experimenting with it. So keep an eye out for these. If your research area and you fit the goals of this program, I would suggest go for it. Now, as always, write to the review criteria. And the overall reason that Congress and our country fund training for individuals like yourselves is they want to make sure that the next generation of biomedical research investigators are off to a running start. So when you write your proposal, the folks that are reviewing your application will provide you an overall impact score from 10 to 90 based on their assessment that the materials you provide them demonstrate that this fellowship will likely enhance your potential for and a commitment to being a productive, independent, scientific research career investigator. Now, it's not saying what kind of research career. Maybe you'll head off to industry. Maybe you'll head off to the government or work for the FDA or the CDC, or you might be an academic researcher, or you might teach in a small college. The importance is that this fellowship is going to make sure you're progressing and ready to become committed to including scientific research in your career aspirations. There are 5 review criteria for the fellowship proposals. In some ways, for those of you who listen to our case sessions, it's somewhat very similar. You as the candidate will be evaluated for your readiness and your potential. Your sponsor, the individual who is your advisor or advisors, if you're a graduate student, or supervisor if you're a postdoc. And NIH uses the term sponsor because you as a candidate do not yet have your own independent funding. And again, the word mentor and sponsor becomes synonymous, so just don't get confused by this language. Your research training plan will be evaluated. And again, it's a training plan. It's not just a research plan. By doing the research you propose, you're learning new things. But most of all, a fellowship application needs to demonstrate that there's substantial training potential for you, and hopefully this will help you to complete your degree requirements. And finally, the environment and the institutional commitment to you and your success as a trainee is judged. 3 reviewers will review your proposal, and you'll get scores on each of these 5 buckets. And again, collectively, the study section will assign an overall score. So the first principle with a fellowship award, this is not something that you go off on your own and take a hike and go up into the woods and write your application. Absolutely not. This is a collaboration with you and your advisor, mentor, sponsor. So you will be the principal investigator, however, because this award is given to you in your name on behalf of your institution. So as a principal investigator, you have to be responsible for submitting the application. You can't be passive and just expect your mentor to do this. Now, I know this is difficult because you haven't done this before, but I am sure your advisor and mentors will help, as will the research staff in your department and your respective institutions. I also highly encourage you, do the first draft of the research training plan and collaborate with your sponsor as you refine it. And I'll explain more about that why later, because you and your mentors have some statements that you have to make. Now, keep in mind, your mentor, advisor, or sponsor also has to write a portion of the application. So you will not have a successful submission if you leave this until 2 weeks before the submission deadline. First of all, your advisor may be busy with another grant application or be out on travel. This has to be a collaboration. And frankly, this is a great way to strengthen your interactions with your mentor and move your dissertation research along or move your postdoctoral training along. So to me, A fellowship application is a perfect vehicle for making sure you and your advisor, sponsor, mentor have the opportunity to plan together and focus things where you would like your career to go. Now, this is where it gets complicated, 1 through 12. There are so many different pieces to this. We're going to break these apart and focus on the ones where you need to collect information. But keep in mind, there are staff that will support you both here at West Virginia University and at your respective colleges and institutions. We're not going to talk about the one-page introduction today. That's only if you need to resubmit, but that's a one-page. But we're going to focus on what you need to write in these different sections, remind you what your mentors, sponsors need to do, and make sure you're aware of all the little parts. Now, keep in mind, as you write, you're not writing a dissertation. And I say that because many of you, when you do your dissertation, your dissertations have 200-300 references. This is going to be a more concise document where your tone has to be short sentences and direct. It has to be very well organized, but it's fundamentally not long sentences or over documented. We're going to be focusing on you as the candidate, and these are some of the sections by which a reviewer begins to understand your potential. We'll focus heavily on the training potential, because the reviewers need to understand, why do you need this support? What are your training goals and objectives? And what activities have you planned to do? Are they appropriate for you? The research training plan, that's what you're doing, but are you making progress? And are you all set to continue the momentum you have? The reviewers need to learn about your sponsor and collaborators in terms of what's their track record of training others, and how do they envision and will they commit to sponsoring you during this award? And lastly, the environment is making sure both the local and the institutional commitment is there. The environment are things like seminars and journal clubs. NIH wants you to be in a very rich, intellectual, scientifically stimulating environment where you can grow as a professional who's conducting research. Now, the fellowship application section you'll be focused on has 3 sections. The first part is where you're going to summarize your research experience. If you've already completed your doctoral dissertation, that's where you'll write about that and what you've published. If you're in the process of developing your dissertation, that's where you'll summarize your progress and your research experience, and maybe highlight any abstracts you've presented at meetings or publications. But many of you have research experience as undergraduates or worked before you went on to graduate school. I worked as a laboratory technician at NIH before I went to graduate school, and it was a very important experience for me. You'll have about 1 page or so to summarize this. Now, it's up to you how you divide these pages. Maybe it's a page and a half, but you have to leave room to talk about your training goals and objectives. The reviewers are going to want to hear from you. What is your career goal? And they're not interested in the details, but kind of the areas of research you're most passionate about, kind of what you might put on your t-shirt if you needed 3 words. For me, it would be aging brain researcher. For you, it might be something else. But the training goals and objectives also have to highlight what it is you're going to learn during this award. And that goes naturally into the next section, where you have to outline a plan for what courses and training and percent effort that will go into each of these sections. Now, the way we recommend you do this is think about telling a story about you, what you've already done up until the day you submit the application. So if you've just finished your candidacy exams as a graduate student, you can say, I've just defended in January 2022. I'm really moving into a very highly productive phase of my research, but I still need to learn how to do in vitro slice work, or I still need to learn how to analyze data from a large data set. So you have to kind of tell the story, what you've done, and then where you want to be when you grow up as a scientist. And we can argue, how do we know when we're actually a scientist? But what they want to know is that you want to have a career that is active as a researcher, improving the health of the nation, a biomedical investigator. Doesn't matter what discipline, whether you're clinical, basic, or translational. But then the bulk of your proposal is designed to get you from your past to your future. And this award is stepwise progression to make sure you complete your doctoral degree or advanced degree or your postdoctoral training. And we'll give you some tips on how to illustrate this for the reviewers. So the first part, what have you done? You'll really get to show off yourself and highlight your enthusiasm, your commitment, what you enjoy doing, and can highlight certainly some things you've done as an undergraduate research. And I know, for example, in middle school, I had a science teacher that just really inspired me. And so whatever it is that motivates you is important to communicate. Postdoc baccalaureate research, many of you might have a year off before you go on after your degree to grad school. And then what are you currently doing? And set up a story where you have some introduction to your laboratory and why you like this project, how your project relates to a question, a little background, and then your accomplishments to date. Don't forget this, because in your first and second and even third years of graduate education, you're learning a lot, you're contributing to the work of the laboratory. You might not have been a first author on a paper yet, but hopefully a co-author. Maybe you've just presented at your first national conference. And again, you can touch on your rotations, but I would say minimize that focus only if you've had a highly productive rotation or it resulted in your current mentorship. Again, how reviewers find out about you is they look at your National Institute BioSketch, the NIH BioSketch. You'll have a short space for a paragraph to state why you're well suited for this F award. You'll talk about your appointments and contributions. And this is the one time you need to upload your scholastic performance. Yes, your grades. So make sure you have your grade transcripts in front of you so you accurately list your scientific courses. There is some discretion about not having to list every course you've ever taken, but you do want to be honest and ethical. And then there's a place to, if you have published papers, to begin a public link. Now, use a structured framework as you describe your research experiences. So as you do this, it's always important to start with what was the question you were interested in studying? And if there was a hypothesis, what were you trying? What was this hypothesis? Then you can state succinctly, or if you have room, some of the major findings and why they were impactful. And then be clear about your role. Reviewers are not going to expect you as a first-year graduate student to be first author on a paper unless you've had some prior experience that's gotten you ready for that. So be honest. It's perfectly logical and expected for you to be in a collaborative role, supporting perhaps a senior postdoc in your group or your mentor on the project. But then explain with these 4 little buttons, from your experience in this role, how has this really informed the next step in your career? How has it motivated you or directed you to then develop your dissertation research? So think of these, you might have 3 or 4 of these, each little small paragraphs that logically lead to what you want to do with this proposal. Also, your achievements and potential are documented by reference letters. I know for all of you to get into graduate school, you've had to have reference letters. For those of you who are postdocs, same thing, and you all need letters when you go on to your next positions. You need a minimum of 3 letters. They cannot be from the individual who will be your sponsor or collaborators. NIH doesn't want them to bias things too much. And at least 1 reference should not be in your current department. That's a request. And sometimes this seems a little awkward because you don't really, you're busy focused in your department. I would suggest look for someone you see at seminars that you talk to and get to know them, or look for an opportunity to have their students or postdocs introduce you to their mentor. These letters speak to your competency, so your ability to do research, but also your potential. And again, keep in mind the folks who've written these letters have had many graduate students and postdocs. They can tell when folks really care about the research, work hard to find solutions. They fully understand you can work on a research project that goes nowhere for a period of time. But you know what? Your ability to stick with something and problem solve and come up with new solutions or go in a new direction shows your commitment to being an independent investigator. Now, here are the review criteria that the reviewers have to address. They look at your record and your research experience is of acceptably high quality. Do you have the potential to become an independent and productive researcher? Not be, but develop. And do you demonstrate a commitment to a research career in the future? And again, it's not a given research career in any specific part of the country or what kind of employer you're going to have, but that you see that a research career fits your goals, your aspirations, and you're committed to it. Training goals and objectives. These are important because you have to give your reader a framework. Here's what I want to do. So make sure your overall career goal is just research focused. It doesn't have to be detailed. But what needs to be detailed is in this proposal, what are the skills and things you're going to learn? They're kind of going to be 2 parts. There's going to be sort of the didactic, experimental design and techniques, but there's also going to be professional skills, lab management, how to collaborate, how to network. So you're going to need to look for examples of some training you can receive through your institution. And here at WVU in the Health Sciences, the Office of Research and Graduate Education has extensive resources for you and assistance on that. We'll speak about that later. And then you have to show them you have a plan. And especially for those of you who are in your dual degree candidates who still are in clinical training, but for everyone, you still need to give them a sense of the percent of time And frankly, they're going to want to see that the majority of your time is focused on research, but you know these other issues like training and responsible conduct of research, dissemination of your research findings, and going to conferences and professional development is important. Now, this is an example courtesy of our dean, graduate school dean, Lisa Salati at West Virginia University. That's, I think, a really excellent example of how you can put together a table that speaks to research skills, mentorship, some coursework you might take in year 3 or 4 because you want some advanced seminars. When you're taking your RCR training, your ability to learn presentation and writing skills, and then networking and conferences and things like that. So keep this in mind, that a table really communicates that you've put this together. And there are review criteria for the training potential. This is the research plan. Keep in mind, will this plan help you gain experience that's appropriate? And does this plan address not only your strengths, but perhaps some areas you've identified where you need to strengthen those gaps? And again, is it valuable, and will it serve as a foundation for you to complete your doctoral work, complete your postdoctoral training, and be a productive researcher? Again, the research plan is fundamental to these kinds of applications. It's got to be good science. In many respects, this will be the easiest part for you to write because it's currently what you're doing. Make sure you do the first draft of this and then get feedback from your mentors and colleagues. Now, you're not going to have a lot of room for this section. Keep in mind, you'll have 1 page for your specific aims, but likely about 6 pages maximum for discussing significance and approach. Now, typically, NIH applications have a section called innovation. I actually recommend that you still put it in, but it is not required. But keep in mind, it's 6 pages to describe your research plan and how you're going to accomplish it. So it's a hard application because it's not a lot of space to write this information. So we recommend a structure. From your specific aims page, repeat the title, provide 1 or 2 sentences what the rationale is for your hypothesis and why you're using certain methods. If you have preliminary data, be sure to showcase that. If you don't, perhaps you've got some other data from your laboratory or another manuscript from a published literature. Be sure to highlight that and give full credit. But then you're going to focus on the approach. Describe the experiments and the controls, how you're going to analyze it, do things in triplicate, but also point out what's going to be new for you. And this is important because if you're not learning something new, they may think you don't really need this fellowship. And then describe the outcomes, how you think this data will be generated, and then show that you understand there are potential issues that could be trouble you're going to need to troubleshoot. And you can speak to help from folks in your area, your consultants, your mentors. And again, once you develop this, you probably have like maybe 2 pages at the most to communicate this. It's hard to write succinctly, but make sure you have all these headers covered. It's important. Also, include a timeline for your research. And if you haven't done timelines before, there are lots of sites on the web you can check. This is one from JetPub. I think it's quite detailed, but it shows you what a timeline is. Make sure you've figured out if you're asking for 3 years of funding, show what your timeline is for 3 years of funding. If you're requesting 5 years of funding, show how you're going to do your K99 and then not your K, your F99, and then your K00. And remember, these tables get included in your 6 pages, so they can't take up the whole page. You're just not going to have them. So be concise. You have additional contributions that are important. And this goes back to what I meant about you writing the first draft. Both you and your sponsor will have to have a statement about how you work together to develop the research training plan. And I will tell you, it's important that you, as the trainee, whether you're a pre-doc or a postdoc, can state that I spoke with my mentor, about the idea I had, but I sat down and wrote the first draft of this proposal. And then from then on, receive input from my sponsors and collaborators. But unless that statement is clear that it's your work you're putting forward, the reviewers will feel like you're not quite ready to be independent. So it's a stretch when you take ownership of this. It's a little scary, a little risky, but trust me, that's a good feeling. That means you're on target, that you're not quite sure am I doing the right thing? Don't worry about that. Just dig in, do the draft, and then your sponsor can say in his or her section, you know, I was so impressed with Rob. He took the initiative, good word, to write the first draft of his research plan. And I was impressed by his ideas, good word, and his ability to show his passion and commitment to a career in biomedical research. Now notice, I didn't say whether Rob was a good or bad writer. I just tried to showcase him as an individual who is ready for this award. That's what your sponsor is going to do for you. You also have to write a real clear paragraph. Why are you training where you are? So explain why you selected to be a graduate student in biomedical research in the health science at West Virginia University or wherever you are. Explain what attracted you to your mentor, your sponsor. Maybe it was that individual's you had a rotation with them and really enjoyed the laboratory group and his or her availability to listen to your questions. Showcase that. But keep in mind, you're also justifying why you're going to keep training at this institution during this award. So, you know, there's so many resources at your respective institutions. Excuse me. Now, the review criteria. Sorry. I didn't touch anything. The review criteria are essentially what your reviewers are going to be commenting on. They're going to be looking to see, are things feasible? Does this plan make sense with where you are? And to some extent, not that you're independent from your research, but it's an area of growth. Pardon me here. Again, this is a collaboration between you and your sponsor. Now, keep in mind, you've got to manage your boss. Okay, no offense to our sponsors and mentors. We all have bosses. We all have folks we report to. And in the world that we work in, we have to work with those folks and help them be successful. So keep in mind, don't surprise your sponsor with this 2 weeks before it's due. Work on this a couple months ahead. She or he have to write quite a bit about you and how they're going to be committed to you and have funding for your research. And they want to be viewed as a committed professional. Also, for fellowship applications, They actually have specific criteria they have to address, and they have a limit of 6 pages. So keep in mind there are issues that they have to be thinking about as they prepare this. Now, we just want to recommend, many of you may have wonderful advisors, supervisors that are assistant professors. They're fabulous to work with because they've just come from postdoctoral positions. They've got great techniques. They love being in the lab. However, for purposes of a fellowship award, you want to make sure you probably add a co-mentor who is a full professor who's been training graduate students or postdocs for many years. Also, you have a doctoral dissertation committee. Perhaps you can consider them as a mentoring advisory team. And then provide some information about your environment. You know, there's journal clubs, there's seminars. The Office of Research and Graduate Education in Health Sciences provides an F grant writing group. Maybe you participated in that, but don't assume that everyone's been to your campus. So kind of think of this as a way to, if you were giving someone a tour of what your facilities and what gets you excited, and you were recruiting them to come to your institution. Why is this a great place to be a trainee? Be enthusiastic, okay? Now, with all grant writing, there's going to be the front pages. You're going to spend most of your time on that. There are the other pages: cover page, abstract, facilities, human subjects, animals, budgets. You need to work with your grants office, and they'll help you through these. And they fortunately know where these things go. But keep in mind, you'll need a title and you'll need a cover letter, because that's where the list of your referees' names go, okay? And then there are all these other pieces that we talked about go in different sections. And if you're doing a fellowship that promotes diversity, there's an extra statement that needs to be included, but the folks that are helping you with this, your graduate school deans, will be helpful. Again, when you write a proposal, write to the criteria. Don't be shy about putting yourself forward as a candidate. You know, the world needs your smarts, your skills, your ability to think and create and make new knowledge. And who knows? It's not just about getting the Nobel Prize, but contributing as an educator or a researcher. And in turn, someday you'll be mentoring graduate students and postdocs yourselves, who knows? Your sponsor has work, your training plan, the training potential. That is, if NIH invests in you, they're investing in the future of a workforce that can improve our nation's health. Now, last but not least, it's important to recognize fellowship applications have 3 deadlines per year. So the upcoming one is April 8th. I don't know if any of you on today are submitting April 8th, but that's coming up very quick. Once it's received, it goes to CSR. It'll be reviewed late June, early July. You'll get a score back at that point, but you won't know whether or not it's funded until it goes to council. So there's a period of not quite 6 months before you'll even know if it's approved by council. The earliest an April submission can start is December 2022 for this year. I would say that's only if the NIH budget is approved on schedule. But keep in mind, think of these deadlines, plan ahead now. If you're a first year graduate student, you might be thinking, well, next time I meet with my advisor, or maybe I'm a second year student, I've finished my rotations. I want to think ahead. When should I be writing a fellowship? Now's the time to have this conversation and plan ahead. And you could be planning for April 2023. It's not that far away. It seems like it. Okay. And again, they will help you through the submission because there's lots of institutional processes. Now, always do your best to plan for 2 submissions. That's what we mean by a resubmission. Because sometimes when you submit, comes back from review, things go wonderfully, we'll all celebrate. But sometimes you get some feedback. There's a question or there's an area where the reviewers felt that you didn't quite explain something well, or they had some questions about your methods. You know what? Get that review when it comes back, look at it carefully with your mentor, your advisor, make a plan to address those concerns and go through the process again. And then it will take, instead of 9 months or 10 months to receive funding, it'll take a good 1.5 years on the average. But you know what? You're in it for the long haul and you're learning as you're writing. And I would say the other really wonderful part about this application is it really strengthens your communication skills. It helps you with planning where your research project is going. And frankly, when it's funded, it's just an added bonus. But, enjoy the ride because that's part of being a trainee. You guys are in the best period of your lives. I know I've heard people say that to me when I was a postdoc. It was the best time of my research career. It is truly a joy to be doing research, and I wish you great success. Rob, I think we have to stop here. I don't know if there are any quick questions in the chat room before we switch.
I don't see anything. Okay. We'll take a moment's break and then we'll start with the next session.
Okay, and Rob, thank you very much. And to everyone, our professional development core folks that are on today, Sarah Heyman and Jody Saunders will be contacting you sometime next week with the evaluation materials. And once you complete your evaluation, they'll make sure you have access to the presentations. Thank you.
Okay, if you're joining us for the next session, which will focus on your first R, please put your name, email address, and institution in the chat box, and so we can follow up with an evaluation after the session tomorrow and provide you with the PDFs of the slides.
Rob, do you need a stretch break or are you ready to roll?
No, I think we should get going.
Okay. First of all, it's really my pleasure to introduce Dr. Robert Milner. For those of you who have just joined us, Rob, I apologize if I've muddled your title, but you're a senior dean for faculty affairs at the Keck School of Medicine. Don't laugh at me, at the University of Southern California. But what we're delighted is Rob has extensive experience with grant writing. So you're in good hands, and we're delighted to have this opportunity to talk with you this morning about the NIH Art Grant Series. So Rob, take it away, and thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Joan, and let's get started. So this session will focus on your first R. How do you make that step to your first independent research project from NIH? We're going to give you guidance on applications, and we're going to focus on applications for 3 award mechanisms in the R series, the R01, the R03, and the R21. And your objectives are to choose the appropriate type of award for your particular situation, the kind of science that you're doing, and to submit an application using strategies that will provide, hopefully, for a successful resolution, successfully getting funding. We're going to talk about, I'm going to give you a background on these. We'll talk a little bit about the nature of those 3 award mechanisms, the R01, R03, and R21. And then Dr. Lakoski will take over and provide you with some strategies for success as we go through, particularly focusing on the 5 criteria areas that NIH uses to review and evaluate the R series of awards. And this is really kind of symbolizes what you want to look for as 1s and 2s in all of those 5 areas. And this was actually taken from a real summary statement. That's your goal there, sitting right in the middle of the page. And along the way, if you have any questions, please drop them into the Zoom chat box, and we'll try and stop at times and respond to your questions, as well as at the end if there's time remaining. So this R series, the NIH Research Project Awards, provides support for independent investigator-initiated projects. This is really the gold standard of research support from NIH. These are awards, you have the ideas, you have the plans, you initiate the project, you submit it to NIH for funding. And in the budget for NIH, little over $6 billion is allocated each year, funding around 11,000 new or renewed research projects. So this is new stuff. I mean, understand that the large volume of the NIH budget, which is going to be close to $45 billion this year, has to cover, because these are multi-year projects, not just the first year, but all the successive years. But the funding for new awards, 11,000, is over $6 billion, a large chunk of money. Most of that, well, a majority of it goes to support the R01, a tiny slice for the R03, and a slightly larger slice of the R21. And about a third of that funding goes to this alphabet soup of other kinds of award mechanisms, some of which may fit your particular situation. It's useful for you as an educated scientist and a consumer at NIH to understand these different award mechanisms and see if any fit your particular situation. But today we're going to focus on this 2/3 of the pie, these 3 major R series awards. And the classic, the gold standard, the oldest and most commonly used is the R01, the NIH Research Project Grant Program. It's to support a discrete, specified, circumscribed project, circumscribed. I apologize. It's 7 o'clock in the morning in California. So that implies it has to be focused on a particular area and representing your interests and your competencies. So you already see that focus in that general description of the award. It's generally awarded for 3 to 5 years. There's no dollar limit. I mean, there's some limits on how the award is submitted, depending on the total funding. But it's used by all institutes and centers at NIH. In fiscal 2020, which is the last year we have full data, little over 5,000 new R01 awards were funded by NIH at a success rate of 17.4%. That means of the success rate is the number of awards that were funded over the number that was submitted. So a little less than 1 in 5, not great, but if you have good ideas and you write a good application, then the chances are that you will have increased success. If you're renewing an already funded R01 award, and these can be continued indefinitely. I've seen awards that have gone out for 30, 35 years. Single award that's been renewed every 3 to 5 years over that period of time. The success rate for a renewed R01 is 40%. So you might ask yourself, why would I, if I already have an R01, why would I submit a new one rather than renewing the one I have? There are constraints on the amount of money that you can request for a renewed R01. So many people opt to submit a new one rather than renew the one that they already have. Although the success rate is significantly higher, as you can see, 1 in 4, 2 in 5. The R03 is the NIH Small Grant Program, and it means small grant. It supports discrete, well-defined projects that can be completed in 2 years and require limited levels of funding. So this is really dedicated to a small project. Up to $100,000 total direct costs and up to $50,000 direct costs in any year. And it's not renewable. You just get 2 years, $100K to work on a very discrete project. A little less than 500 new R03 awards were funded in 2020, and the success rate was 22.7%, a little bit higher than the R01, but much less funding. So what kind of well-defined projects could be done in 2 years? It could be pilot or feasibility studies. You want to do secondary analysis of data that you've already collected. Small, self-contained, focusing on a single aim. Development or testing of new research methodology or technology, developing a new method. They are not expected to have the same level of detail as or discussion found in an R01. And NIH says preliminary data are not required, particularly if you're looking for doing pilot or feasibility studies. But any information that you can provide that will reassure reviewers that the project will succeed and produce relevant information is going to help your application. The viewers want to be sure that funding the application will lead to success. So if you can demonstrate that there are parallels, other areas of research that have had the same kinds of success, certainly that you have the competence to do the studies as well as the appropriate resources, will enhance the likelihood that you will get funding. The R21 is another small grant mechanism, but it's designed for exploratory or developmental research and intended to encourage these. This is the kind of high risk, high gain kind of project, kind of the speculative projects that, wouldn't it be great if we could do this? I got this fabulous idea. Can I test it? Again, it's limited to 2 years of funding with a little bit more, $275,000 total direct costs, and no more than $250 direct costs in any year. And again, like the R03, it's not renewable. In fiscal 2020, there were 2209 new R21 awards, and the success rate, 17.3, is pretty much identical to the success rate of the R01. So again, what kinds of projects fall into this kind of high risk, high gain category? Looking at a novel area of investigation, asking a new question, testing a new experimental system. I'm developing this protocol. Is it going to work? Applying an existing methodology to a new scientific question, taking something from here and applying it elsewhere. And it's really that high risk, high gain. That there's a questionable chance of success, but if it was successful, it would really be a breakthrough. It would open doors for a whole area of new research or application of a technology. And a long-term project, or if it's something that's, kind of following up on previous studies in a well-established area, that doesn't fit with the R21. Again, NIH says preliminary data are not required, but you can include, and you want to be sure that when you're proposing something that has high risk, you want to be able to reassure the reviewers as much as possible that there is feasibility, the odds of success are high, and that you have the competence and resources to make it work. And just to emphasize again, the comparative success rates of these award mechanisms, and particularly to highlight the difference between the success rate for a new R01 and the success rate for one where you're renewing. The others are kind of around the same, plus or minus 2% are a 1 in 5 or 20% success rate. Again, not great. NIH is very competitive, but you know, a good application written well that conveys exciting ideas and approaches will have a higher chance of success. And as we emphasized in the last hour, the success rates across NIH, different institutes may vary. Again, if the kind of research that you do falls within the scope of more than one NIH institute, you may want to look at this and see where you have higher chances of success. Now, the R01 is used universally by all NIH institutes and centers. And that's not true of the R03 or the R21 mechanisms. And how different institutes support those mechanisms may vary. And it's important then to look at the particular institute that might support your research and see how they support them. Be aware that the program announcements for all NIH awards come in two flavors. They're what are called the parent awards. And the parent awards, that's the program announcement for a generic R01, a generic R03, a generic R21. Some institutes support those parent awards, but other institutes do not accept unsolicited R03 or R21s. They only support them through specific funding opportunity announcements. These are program announcements that are sent out from particular institutes or an institute highlighting funding for a particular question in biomedical science. You can use the NIH grants guide to look at the variety of these. You can search the grants guide to see if any fit your area of research. So currently there's about 26 funding announcements for the R03 and over 100 for the R21, looking for high risk, high gain research in very specific areas of biomedical science. So be aware that you can't just always write an R03 or an R21 and submit it to an NIH institute. It's important to understand what that institute does accept for these award mechanisms. A question that many new investigators particularly ask, you know, when I get to this stage, you know, I've completed most of my training and I'm starting to think about R-series grants. Should I choose an R01 or should I choose an R03 or an R21? You know, the tendency is to think about the R03s or the R21s because they're smaller, lower funding, limited time, only 2 years, as kind of a stepping stone for an R01. That's not really true because those award mechanisms have specific uses, particularly the R21. R03, yes, you might apply for an R03, perhaps while you're a postdoc, if you're allowed to do that, or as a junior investigator in somebody else's lab for a small defined project. It's not going to give you a lot of money, but it is going to give you some funding. The R21 is the speculative, the high risk, high gain. And I don't think as a new investigator, you should be trying to establish yourself as an independent investigator by pursuing high-risk, high-gain research. It's something to consider. Now, R01 applications typically will require preliminary data and must be focused on an important question. But also consider that if you're a new and early stage investigator, for your first R01 submission, you will get special consideration in the review panel, and often at many institutes, better pay lines, higher pay lines for an R01. You do not get that for an R03 or an R21. You may qualify for R56 bridge funding if you're close to the pay line. R01s always provide you with longer and higher funding, giving you that really strong foundation for establishing yourself as an independent investigator. And as I've just shown you, small grants, those R03s and R21s are equally competitive, and they're really not designed for career development. They're really designed for discrete projects. So seek advice. You know, if you get to the stage, talk to your mentors, talk to those who have funding, who have been there, and get their opinion as to what's the best way to go. You need to contact your program officers. Again, as we said in the last session, look at the program announcement, click on this link towards the top of the announcement, and it will take you to a page that describes how each institute manages that particular award mechanism and the contact information for the program officers who will be able to give you direct and accurate information about how that institute manages that award. There's also a very useful website called Matchmaker, which is part of the NIH Reporter. You simply enter text, you know, for example, the first paragraph of your specific aims that describes the background for your research. Click one of these two buttons, press search, and you can either find similar funded projects, so you can see what NIH has already funded in your area, or the program officers who manage those award mechanisms. Very useful part of your research at NIH.
Rob, we have a few questions in the chat room. Can we take a quick question before we go through this? Because I think some of them are very relevant. So one person asked, what is an R56 bridge funding? This is a mechanism for NIH has for individuals who are in the idea states. And if you have a score on your art grant, particularly the R01, that's close to the pay line but missing it, your institutional official can apply to see if there's some bridge funding from the idea funding for perhaps 2 years of the proposal, and the other comes from your regular NIH institute. This has to be done through your institution. And in West Virginia, in the health sciences, that's through Dr. Laura Gibson, who's the Senior Associate Vice President for Research. Rob, there's another question. Would you advise getting a K first, then going for an R01 as a stepping stone for new faculty?
Yeah, the K mechanisms, as we talked about last week, are an excellent stepping stone to going for an R01. Again, it really depends on your particular situation, and particularly how much you have under your belt in terms of research experience and the preliminary data that you need for an R01. I mean, ideally, you should come out of a postdoc into a first faculty position with a chunk of data, papers published, techniques perfected, preliminary data that gives you the foundation for that first R01. If you're not in that situation, then a K will provide you the means to get to that place. So it's really a sense of, you know, where you are, what you've been doing, what's the state of your research program, in order to decide between whether you're immediately competitive for an R01 or need to go through the career development stage first in order to get to that place.
And a K award can be really helpful for a clinician who decides they want some more research training. So they're in a different stage after residency and fellowship than you would be if you've been a postdoc for 3 or 4 years. So it really depends where you are, but I agree, Rob, completely. Rob, there's one last question for you. If you receive an R01, does that increase your chance of getting a second one for a different project? That's an interesting question. Thank you.
Having a history of funding is always important.
Yeah.
That guarantees that, when reviewers look at your biosketch and they see a consistent sequence of funding, F31, F32, K, R series grants, they're going to say, this applicant really knows what they're doing. They know how to write grants. They know how to manage it. They're successful. They know how to work the business. So yes, if you get an R01, that might increase your chance, but it also depends on the quality of that second project. It's not going to buy you any brownie points if that project is not well constructed, if it's not clearly written. But so yes and no is the response to that.
Okay.
Okay, let's
Move on.
Find out where I am in my slides.
Here
we go. So the other message is that, all money is green. We love R01s because, that's the gold standard. That's what promotion committees look at. That's what tenure committees look at. But, bottom line is you need funding to maintain and sustain your research program. And so wherever you can get that from, look for funding sources from your institution, from Joan Sharp, the West Virginia Clinical and Translational Science Institute, from your professional societies, from private foundations, from other areas of government. Department of Defense, for example, particularly for some cancers, is an excellent source of funding. And there's also industry awards, clinical trials, all of those good things. So be very open and broad in where you look for funding. Let me just kind of finish up this section by talking about what you need to demonstrate to reviewers. And it really boils down to this. Competitive proposal must have high impact and few, if any, weaknesses. So there's two things here. There's high impact. It's got to answer a good question and have the potential of providing new information in an important area of biomedical sciences. And it has to do that without any major flaws in what you propose. And the review criteria for the R series are these 5 areas. And you must have high scores for each of these. As I said, 1s and 2s out of that range of 1 to 9 for each of these areas. Significance. Is it important? Are you asking an important question? You, the investigators, are you well suited? Do you have the competence? Innovation. Is it new thinking? Are you advancing the field? Advancing it, but not so far out in front of the field that it would be considered to be speculative. Is it the approach? Is it feasible? Do you have the competence to do it? Can it be done? And in the environment, are there the right resources to do the work at your particular institution? And you need to keep these 5 criteria in mind as you write the proposal. And this is how they break down to the overall impact score. This is how they affect the overall impact score, which is the score that will determine your ranking and whether you're above or below the pay line. And what NIH says is the likelihood for the project to exert a sustained, powerful influence on the research field. So the likelihood comes from these 3 criteria: the investigators, your competence and experience; the approach, are you asking the right questions and doing the right experiments; and the resources in your environment. And the sustained, powerful influence comes from demonstrating the significance of the proposal, that you're asking an important question, and that it's new thinking, that it's innovative. So again, think about that, and this is how those map to the to that overall statement. And this is how it breaks down in terms of your final overall impact score. And you want to be up here on the high, the 1, 2s, and 3s. 4, 5, and 6 is, you know, a mix of flaws and strengths. What's called looking forward to seeing it again on the review panel. And where you don't want to be is down here. And so forget those high scores. It has to be an important project, have high impact with few or no weaknesses. To be in this framework, you might have high impact, but with significant weaknesses. Or it might be a moderate program. It might be a perfect experimental grant, but it's not asking an important question. And that will end you up as medium impact. Where you don't want to be is down here with many flaws or having a low importance, low impact project. And this really is your goal. In your summary statement, you get reviews from 3 reviewers typically, and each of those will give you a score on the 1 to 9 scale. And as you can see, and this is a real example from a colleague at my previous institution, UMass Medical School, 1s and 2s from each reviewer. Impact priority score 10, perfect 10, which is the highest you can get, percentile 2%. This is your goal. This is nirvana. This is kind of where you want to be. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Joan. Let's see if there's any more questions.
Yeah, there is a question, and it deals with the R21 versus an R01 as a new investigator, early career stage researcher. I would just say the R21s are highly competitive because senior investigators can apply for them. And I think that you need to be sure that if you're ready to go for an R01, go for it, because you'll get the advantages of being an early stage investigator. The R21, you don't get any bonus points for being a new person, early career person. So it's just this issue of, are you ready to move forward with an R01? Rob, thoughts on that too?
No, I exactly agree. Everybody, very experienced investigators, use the R21 mechanism, and they're in a very good position to do that because they already have funding from other areas, other mechanisms. And so they have a foundation that they can go out and be speculative in a particular area. And you're going to be competing against the best in the country for those awards with no greater success rate than an R01. There's another question, Joan.
Okay. Could you read that?
Yeah, could you please give us an idea what kind of preparation early career researchers should take before submitting an R01 in terms of initial data set publications, or do I need any prior funding? I think, one of the approaches I strongly suggest is when you write a proposal, put yourself in the position of the reviewer and ask yourself, if I was reviewing this proposal, what would convince me that this has high merit? What would convince me to be excited about it? And so, yes, you need to demonstrate that the project is feasible, which means you are going to have preliminary data, and you are going to have to demonstrate your own competence. Having prior funding may be necessary in order to accomplish that. Having pilot grants, having other funding that enables you to get to that stage where you can come in with a fully fledged R01. Joan, you have thoughts on that one?
No, I think you're right. It'll tie into what I'm going to say next. But let's just do one last question. What's meant by the pay line? Good question. NIH and each institute within NIH, remember it's 27 institutes and centers, it may be 28 when the new one gets approved, they have their own budgets. And each of the 3 cycles, when council meets, the council will review the applications that have been scored and determine how many they can fund. So that pay line is that percentile at which a grant is funded versus not funded. Now, that being said, it's complicated because most institutes will fund the first 10 to 15% of their grants right in order. Occasionally, council will pull proposals that meet a certain theme and fund those out of the order. But pay lines are important because, and we're all lucky, it looks like Congress is ready to approve a 5.6% increase in the NIH budget for this fiscal year. If that happens, each of the institutes and centers will have another 2.4% money to spend on research grants and projects. So the pay lines, your goal is to, get in the pay line that's funded and not be in the group that's not funded. That's my explanation of pay line. Rob, any thoughts?
No, I think that's excellent. And there's just one more question that I'll deal with quickly, which is can people not in academia or directly affiliated with a university still apply for NIH funding? It depends on where you work. So any institution that receives NIH funding must be accredited and certified by the NIH to receive the funding. And that's a whole bunch of things that they have to go through to demonstrate that they will be appropriate stewards of the taxpayers' money. So it will depend on where you work. Many private companies, industry are set up to do that. It's a matter of where you work. Do they have approval to receive funding from NIH?
Well, and if
you can't do it from your garage at home.
That's correct.
Unless you want to go through all of those certifications, which I wouldn't recommend.
Yeah, and if you work in industry, your industry may not want you to have funding from NIH. Just look at the vaccines, where one company took NIH funding and another one didn't. Non-for-profits are eligible, but they have to demonstrate they can handle and meet the certification requirements. Okay, thank you all for those good questions. We'll come back at the end and get the rest of the questions, so keep them coming. I trust you can all see my screen, correct, Rob?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. What we're going to do is now talk about strategies to be successful. So again, as Rob has shared with you, you will get scored in the 5 criteria. So I'm going to go through each of these criteria and give you some suggestions and tips on ways you can be successful. So to score high as an investigator for an R01 and even an R03 or an R21, you have to have a track record. And that track record, maybe it started when you were an undergraduate, a graduate student, a postdoc, maybe a research assistant professor, or maybe you went from postdoc to junior faculty. How do we develop a track record? Well, it's your publications, and your publications are essential for your promotion and tenure to show your scholarship in our academic institutions. But a publication is the best way to demonstrate your area of knowledge and competence, and also demonstrate your experience, and also show that you're actively engaged in conducting research. So when there are 2 grants, and they're equally getting sort of similar scores, the one who has an excellent publication record and is disseminating their findings will win every time. Now, some faculty feel, especially if they're doing a resubmission on their R01, they have to get those publications out to show they've used the funds wisely. But most of all, if you have some preliminary data that it may not be extensive, but it shows that you can work with a certain technique or your model has some relevance, that's incredibly helpful. So if you're, say, in your first year faculty position, you may not want to rush and submit your R01 as soon as you walk in the door. You may want to wait 12 months, 14 months to gain some preliminary data from your new institution and get a publication out. Now, a year's worth of work is likely not going to be a Cell Science Nature paper, but it could be an excellent short communication that shows your program is up and running at your new institution. You have the technical abilities and the boots on the ground, the wheels on the bus are going around successfully. So keep that in mind. Now, to score high in significance, it's absolutely essential, as Rob has described, that you're really asking an important question. And as the grant writer, your job is to give those 3 reviewers the information so they in turn can convey to the rest of the study section panel, hey, this is a good question. We are going to learn something new. It's exciting because it's a new way of thinking about this. And if this group does this research, we're going to advance our knowledge in the field and improve human health. Most of all, you must, even in your significance section, make sure it's explicit what you will accomplish, the outcomes, the endpoints, what you will contribute. If you don't do that, your reviewers will come up with their own answer and it may not be actually the answer you were hoping for. Now, to score high on innovation, this is where your project has to have some novelty, something new, something different, because NIH never funds us to do what we already know how to do. They are charged to accelerate. So innovation is a requirement. Now, how innovative is innovative? It all depends. Sometimes, you've got a new hypothesis, a new signaling pathway hasn't yet been examined for a certain mechanism with Alzheimer's disease. Or maybe you've been looking at systemic functions of kidney function in the clinic, and you've been looking at acute kidney injury, and now you want to move to chronic kidney injury. That's a new direction. But it's not likely going to be a paradigm shift where this cures cancer or this cures Alzheimer's disease. And in fact, that's actually, as we know, these diseases are way too complex. So you're not going to be reinventing the universe. You're going to be advancing something in your field. And a great way to think about what's innovative, and perhaps use this statement in your application to complete the stems. This project is innovative because completion of these studies will show that XYZ happens. Okay, so remember, you have to state why this is innovative, and that you, by conducting this research, are going to not only do new research, but you're going to contribute these findings to the literature. And that's again where your publication record matters. If you haven't been publishing recently in the last 2 or 3 years, the reviewers can say, this Joan, she's got a great idea, but you know what? I'm worried she's not publishing. What's wrong? So see how that's the kind of thing that can impact the interpretation of what you propose. Now, fundamental to the art grants is scoring high on your approach. And you need to get your research strategy into the outstanding range, which is a 2. Today's world, if you end up with a score between 30 and 40, it's very good. but it means you'll likely have to come back and resubmit. Not always, but most of the time. So a couple tips. First, keep your proposal focused on your research question. And for those of you on the call today who are early career stage investigators, your challenge is you have too many ideas. The best research projects are focused on one question, one hypothesis. Now, then you need to make sure you have a hypothesis that's clearly stated and it's logical how you're going to test that. So as you get feedback on your specific aims, does it make sense that aim 1 is done before aim 2, then before aim 3? Or sometimes when you get feedback, you find out from your colleagues, hey, aim 3 should really be aim 1. That logic is critically important for a reviewer to follow your thinking. Now, again, back to timelines and budgets. This is where if you provide a timeline or you're setting up your budget, you will walk through, what do I need to do this 6 months? What do I need to do in year 2? What am I doing in year 3? You need to walk that through yourself and then in turn, sell that logic to your reviewers. Feasibility. Oh, that's the big one. If everyone's grants could be submitted every time they were funded, this wouldn't matter. But we have limited funds for research. So who will the funding go to? It could be rigorous, it could be strategic, it could be logic, and it could be focused. But if you cannot demonstrate that you cannot make it work, the reviewers will actually pull their score down and you'll be out of the funding range. How do you demonstrate feasibility? Your track record, who you've published with, the skills you've learned as a postdoc, where you've worked over your career, preliminary data, and publications. Now, feasibility, if you're doing something that's new to you, is going to need more attention in your proposal. Maybe you're going to be doing survey research and you've never done it before, but you can demonstrate you have a team of individuals who have that expertise as collaborators or co-Is. Maybe you're doing a technique, maybe you've done this technique in cell culture, but you've never worked with stem cells. So anytime you have something that's a new approach for you, make sure you have collaborators and consultants that can back you up, be there if you encounter difficulties, but try to show you've got a plan for that too. Now, grant writing is strategic thinking. You have to show your reviewers that you know your field, you know the literature, and you recognize your approach is one approach. And there is no such thing as a perfect grant, even if you get a 10. There's always something that could be different. Nothing, and in fact, if we can make our experiments work every time, we'd all have Nobel Prizes and be rich and famous. Why do the research if you know the answer? We are nothing but problem solvers. So you have to show your reviewers you're a really strategic thinker. And by anticipating problems, you then propose solutions. I'm planning on plan A. This is how it's going to happen. But I also recognize, I may run into difficulties with one step. If so, here's plan B, here's plan C, and here's who will help me. For you as early career stage investigators, co-Is and consultants and collaborators are perfect. It is not a sign of weakness to have a research team come together with you as the PI. It's a sign of strength. And then last but not least, and this criteria being rigorous has come into play because NIH has been slapped on the hand for not being able to replicate results from research studies. I'm sure you've seen those articles, clinical trials not getting published. This whole attention comes from Congress, who wants a return on their investment. So make sure you have the actual language that shows you're going to replicate your findings and triplicate if you're at the bench. For all of us, we have to consult with experts in study design and analysis. Without that, if you had all of these other categories in good shape, but you forgot to discuss the scientific rigor of your proposal, you wouldn't get a high impact priority score. Now, speaking of rigor of the prior research and scientific premise, NIH about 2 years ago changed the official language. And it used to be we could write our significance section and just say, well, you know, the scientific premise from the literature is important and provides the background for what I'm going to do. Now NIH is asking us to include in the significance section, and there's also some in the research plan, a statement about the rigor of the prior research. Now, first of all, I have to share with you, be very careful about publishing on unpublished research because, you know, until it's published, it's not in the literature. Second of all, be very careful. There may be a reviewer at your study section who's part of this published research that you might say has a weakness. So my approach to this is make sure you have these words bolded in your significance section, but kind of use the background of the prior research to highlight what you're doing, what's new and different. So the rigor of the prior research did not have access to this innovative imaging modality. We are going to be the first individuals to test this hypothesis using this combination of PET and fMRI. So you can see how you can turn this to a strength. So don't criticize the weaknesses of the prior research, but point out how it makes an opportunity for you to move forward. Now, in the approach section, you also need these funny little words, rigor of the prior research bulleted. And I will share with you at study section for our grants, the committee chair has on their list as the reviewers close out the reviews, were there any concerns about scientific rigor? And if one of the primary or secondary, tertiary reviewers says yes, the discussion stops, they talk about it, and your score goes down or up, you know, whichever way you consider your numbers. So in the approach section, same strategy. You can use the prior literature, not to say that it was weak, but to say the prior literature research method wasn't as sensitive as this new method, which I will use, or the prior literature methods couldn't integrate, or they didn't have the sophisticated tools to look at a certain signaling pathway, or the prior research was done in samples from a whole organ, and now we're going to look at the intricacies of the villi in the intestine. So use these rigor of the prior research not as a criticism, but a way for you to point out what your project is going to be using. And that's what we mean by using it to justify your project, okay? So pay attention to that. Now, 4 areas must be addressed in the significance section, in the approach section. Also, you must evaluate biological variables, whether it's basic clinical or translational research. For example, sex is a biological variable, and unless you're looking at a very specific disease that only occurs in one gender or the other, you have to look at both sexes. And what's been added to this now is biological variables across the lifespan. So if you're only looking at age 60 to 80-year-olds, or you're only looking at adolescents, make sure you have it very well justified about your sample on a biological basis. And then last but not least, for those of you who do basic bench work, you must authenticate your resources. And next time when Rob and I do this kind of presentation in January 2023, you'll actually have to have a new plan for data sharing, making your databases public. We're going to be seeing a lot coming out from NIH this year about it, because we're all going to need training on that too. So the key, first of all, with your research plan for an art grant, demonstrate you've walked through your plan. Do it when you set up your budget and you figure out how many people you need. Can you afford a full-time postdoc? Maybe you need a full-time tech. Who will your co-Is be? How much % effort can you devote to an art grant? That's something that reviewers will look at too. If you're an early stage investigator and you're only devoting 10% of your effort to an R1, they're going to say, they're concerned that you don't have enough effort. So you have to think that through too. And you can talk with your colleagues and get feedback on all these things. Now, you also have to talk about your environment. It gets a score. So up front, you're going to have pages on your facilities. You're going to have those from your own program, those from your department, those from your CTSI, those from your institution, and maybe there are other facilities at your collaborators groups or at other institutions. So that's in your facility statements that go up front. And those need to look very professional, because the reviewers get an impression of the detail that you include in those. And at WVU, in our Office of Research and Graduate Education, and in the CTSI, we have some examples of that material to get you going. And I'm sure each of your respective institutions do. But in this section, make sure you also demonstrate in the application that you have what you need to complete the project. Not that you will get something, but that you have it. So make sure if you need a letter of support from a core facility that they're going to let you do a certain stroke model, you have that letter. If you need a certain antibody, or you want someone as a consultant who is the leading clinical expert in your field, that's great, as long as they're not going to be in your study section and be an advocate. But also, don't hesitate to point out what's really useful at your institution that will enhance your project. And our WVCTSI is cited in many art grants because we have some specialized resources. Again, document the support. Don't hesitate to ask for a letter of support from your department chair or another senior research official. And in fact, if it's your first art grant, you can even make it look like a K award, in the sense that you could have a committee, advisory committee, just like you had when you're doing your doctoral work or folks you worked with. And just make sure you get letters of support. Okay. Now, lots of resources on grant writing. I'm so excited you came and joined us today, but there are many other resources. For sure, the NIH website and many of the institutes and centers, the Center for Scientific Review, CSR, even has a program called Early Career Reviewer, ECR. One I particularly like is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, because they actually have examples of grants and actual summary statements. So you can actually go online and read through these. If you've never seen an R03, or if you haven't seen a sample R21, it's a good place to start. And ask your colleagues who are funded. Most colleagues are very generous, and I'm sure they'll be happy to share and give you coaching along the way. Now, as a writer, you always need to watch out for the pitfalls, okay? Make sure that the reviewers are confused about your project. They think maybe the question isn't very significant. They'll tell you. Sometimes they'll say it's descriptive, it's fishing. That gets translated as, where's a mechanism? Where's your hypothesis? And many times, you know, the problems we work on are very complex. Sometimes you have to acknowledge to the reviewers that you're focusing on one part of a complex question. Misfiring in innovation, yeah, sometimes we're overambitious. And sometimes the hypothesis is unfocused. Project design, maybe you're lacking a control group, or your statistics aren't sufficient to replicate things. The part you can control is your writing and your presentation. So your responsibility as the PI is to make sure you work hard to communicate your ideas to a group of 3 individuals who are in turn going to share it with another 20 to 30 investigators. And that's the challenge. It's that difficult and it's that simple. So Rob, I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. We're almost
certainly.
Yeah, 1 or 2, because we're almost at the witching hour.
Yeah,
And
well,
I'm
if
just
people want to
gonna
stay on and listen to these answers, that's up to them.
Okay.
So should we use this specific language for the innovation? For example, this project explores new scientific directions by, the current proposal applies a new technique to accomplish blah. Yes, absolutely. There is a technique called writing the review for the reviewer. The reviewer needs to write certain things in the summary statement. And if you can give them text that fits what they need to write, such as this project explores new scientific directions by whatever, and they agree with that statement, it makes their life easier and it makes your chances more successful. So think about writing the review for the reviewer and really think for those innovations and significant questions. Think about, I think as Joan said, answering the question, this proposal is innovative because this proposal, the question here is significant, important because. Think about completing those sentences. Can we apply for 2-hour grants with different projects at the same time? Yes, certainly you can. I wouldn't recommend it. It's hard enough to put 1 in, let alone 2 at the same time. I think you would be compromising yourself by trying to do 2 at once. Stagger them at least by 1 round. It's only 4 months. It takes about 4 months to write one of these things. You might as well spend 4 months writing 1 and then the next 4 months writing the second. I wouldn't recommend that. Interdependent aims. You want to take that? I can take that one.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
So interdependent aims is if your subsequent aims absolutely depend on the outcome from the first aim. Now, subsequent aims obviously can depend on some outcome from, we will do this and then we will do the next step. But if the subsequent aims are absolutely dependent on a specific outcome from that first aim, and it's often producing a reagent. First aim is to generate this congenic mouse that has X, Y, and Z. And then aim 2 is we will then use that mouse to explore this question. Reviewers are going to say, if you ain't got the mouse, you can't do aim 2. That's an independent aim, and it's sometimes called the fatal flaw. So It's always good, particularly when you need specific reagents, to have those ready and available before you submit the application.
And I think the last question, and we're going to have to close out shortly. don't apply for 2R grants at the same time. Trust me, it's much better to put all your creative efforts, focus on one application at a time. What you need to give yourself is a 2 or 3 year grant writing plan. Maybe you do an R grant, and then maybe you do a foundation grant, and then maybe you do a professional society grant. You're going to also want to plan when you can resubmit a grant application. So please be careful about that. It's much better that you do high quality work and fewer applications. Okay. So with that, Rob, any last thoughts?
No, I thank you for your attention today, and our last session tomorrow at 9 your time will focus on writing effective specific aims pages, and we're going to put you to work for a change instead of us talking at you. We want you to bring your ideas for that next proposal, and we will step you through the required elements for an effective specific aims page. And hopefully you'll walk out of that with, you know, a draft of elements of that you can put to use. So it will be very interactive and have an excellent outcome. So everybody have a great day. We look forward to seeing you bright and early, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Great. And
Bye.
Thanks everyone. And thank you, Rob and Sarah and Jody. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks everyone. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.